Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Governor Lael Brainerd from the Federal Reserve. We're now going to shift our attention to the C-suites of our financial institutions, our member firms. And we're going to start with a real leader in this area, and that's Brian Moynihan, who's chairman and CEO of Bank of America. Brian, welcome today. We're glad you could join us. Thank you for taking the time.
It's great to be here, Tim. Thank you for hosting an important session.
Brian, you've been a real leader in this area, and I remember I've seen you at a variety of conferences around the world. Two items that I want to make note of before we sort of generalize that you've really shown leadership, your leadership at the IBC, the International Business Council, and just the report out a few weeks ago on common metrics, 21 ESG-focused metrics, and as well as your work on the Sustainable Markets Initiative with His Royal Highness Prince Charles. Let's start with the IBC work through the WEF on the common metrics. Would you tell us a little bit about what led you to doing that and where do you see this going from here?
Well, the important thing, and you heard some of the last dialogue, is there are a lot of standard setters around metrics for various ESG disclosures. So it's a bit broader than just pure environment, obviously. And we've been focused on trying to harmonize those metrics and standardize those metrics because we think it's important for consumers, for customers, for our employees, and for shareholders to be able to see a common set of metrics across companies. And so, you have to start from a couple basic principles. The Sustainable Development Goals are what the world has declared we need to do to help the world develop on a sustainable basis. They cover, people, planet, prosperity, and principles of governance. We went out, looked at all the metrics, and said, how do you ensure that companies are making progress on the SDGs, and how do you make that across industries? And yet there were there are hundreds of people setting metrics and hundreds of conferences about metrics and how to measure it. So we tried to push it all together. And with the World Economic Forum, the big four accounting firms, we came at it, much like you come at any kind of disclosure question. What are the metrics that would be most important? You got the 21 basic metrics, including things like one of them is to disclose under TCFD. So it's an incorporation of other metrics. The idea was to have those 21 metrics and another 30 odd supplemental metrics, and basically create an occasion to say, if companies disclose these metrics, everybody will be able to tell the difference in companies are making progress on the SDGs and those aren't. And then I can make my decision, investment decision, lending decision, purchasing decision, who I want to work for decision, all those decisions, but I'll have a standard set of metrics. So we announced them, about 70 companies, 7 million employees, et cetera, all in it, trillions of dollars of market cap. We're pushing them out. But these metrics can work in the private equity sector for the portfolio companies. They can work in the public company sector for large companies, and they can also work in mid-sized companies. We're in basically a process of pushing them out. The last point I'd make, and it was a little bit of discussion, we believe in convergence, and we got to get to one set of metrics. And so we're working with the official sector, for lack of a better term, whether it's IOSCO, the IFRS, others, to try to figure out how the issuer side can be represented in this metrics discussion, because at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to disclose them. And we need to have input just like we do in FASB and other types of things.
You mentioned 70 that signed up. They were marquee names. How do you continue to grow that number? And for those who are sort of sitting on the fence, what's the challenge for them? When they push back, what do they tell you?
Well, the questions you often get into, and these companies represent global companies, and is, everything from what if I can't disclose something? Will I be, embarrassed by as an issuer? And the answer is no, because you can explain that this isn't relevant. It's not part of your business model. So some of the professional services type firms, they don't have certain elements of this. So I think it's, the idea is disclose or explain why, but not everybody will be able to put every metric up. And then the other question people ask is, do I have to start tomorrow morning? No, we are asking to sign up to agree to do it. We're starting soon, but others will take a little longer. And so those are the kinds of questions or obstacles we hear about. And so the big four accounting colleagues were critical in this, because remember, they're auditing most of these firms and talking to them all the time about disclosure, and they could help. And they kept a pragmatic wrap around this thing and helped drove it. But the thing I say to all CEOs to look at it that is just critical is never forget why we're doing this. We're doing this to show how capitalism is driving to solve these big problems, sustainable development, growth, the SDGs here. And capitalism is critical to solve those, because without that, you're not going to have the money for all the innovation and transition, a just transition, and all the things you talked about earlier. the money's just not going to be there. Governments don't have the money. Charity can't do it. It has to be done by us taking capitals and aiming at these problems, and these metrics show how to do that.
And to continue to grow the metrics so that we have a broader group who are participating, do you need government to participate, government in Brussels or London or Beijing or Washington? Do you need government to nudge or participate, or do you need government to stay out of the way?
The government will ultimately, as FASB does, or IFRS does, it's a standard set of disclosures. And as Lael said earlier, the TCFD is becoming a standard set of discussion around environmental matters, and it is one of the metrics of these metrics. And so our goal, and we've had input into the various processes the CEOs have and the accounting firms, is to get the issuer side, but ultimately the government has to start to draw, what is the level of disclosure, because it is an official sector question. If we really believe it's and I do and you do, but it's a genuine issue, you have to have an official sector response. And that standardization, harmonization, consolidation, convergence, seeing even some of the metric setting groups which are tremendously effective and have been working hard to get this done, are merging together and consolidating and working together, the 5 or 6 major groups. This is all important things to come up with a set of metrics, because remember, we got to have harmonization across the world, not just in one country. And that is critical here, because there's very few companies that operate in a single country. Even mid-sized companies, their supply chains and where they sell products to are global.
To that point, I keep telling my staff, now that we're ramped up in the U.S., we've been working in Europe for several years, we need to focus on Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, other places that are important jurisdictions. Let's shift to the other topic, which I mentioned, is the Sustainable Markets Initiative you're doing with His Royal Highness Prince Charles, similar to the work we're doing on voluntary carbon markets offset. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this and where do you see this project going?
Well, His Royal Highness has had a long, multi-decade focus on the environment and biodiversity and things like that. And he's had various initiatives over the years, A4S, a group of investors that met us 15 years ago, we were talking about the other day. So he's been trying to get the private sector to, push and take the lead and cooperate and drive. And so that concept he was talking about, and we started he started convening some roundtables and groups to talk about aviation and things. So we started to figure out how to form it. And last year in January, he announced officially the formation of the SMI that actually been operating. And so what the SMI is, a coalition of willing. It's private sector companies, CEO led. We have 20 task force across various industries, aviation, financial services, forest products, plastics, cement, things like that, going across all the industries, probably 300 CEOs actively involved now, basically looking what can we do together to help move faster across many dimensions. And so the principles which we operate under are the broad principles that His Royal Highness put out in early January, called the Terra Carta, which is sort of a statement of where we should go with the environment, things economic actors could do of all kinds. And those are principles we operate under. But the good news here is the work that you and your colleagues and Bill Winter's been leading on something like a voluntary carbon market offset, scaling it. We try to incorporate it, but think about now we have, everybody from the people working on biodiversity applications and things like that, to the people who need the offsets, to the people who can think through the markets, and we're trying to get them all to work together to help, standardize and drive some of this out. And that's the way we work. It's not creating new metrics. The IBC metrics are fine for that group. It's not taking work that the IFF sponsored with Bill's leadership. It's incorporating that, but it's really getting down and saying, how do we as CEOs drive activity and initiatives? And that's one of the key elements.
Brian, in both these examples, it shows that the industry writ large is trying to solve these problems through markets and through leadership like your own. There's a lot of skepticism out there about what's motivating us. Tell me what's motivating you. What got you and Bank of America in such a prominent leadership position on these kinds of solutions?
Well, we started, let's focus on environmental for one specific thing. We started, before I was CEO, my predecessor declared an environmental initiative. I think it was 25 billion. And then when I became CEO, we doubled it to 50. And then we went to 125. And then we did 200. And now that the next 10 years, we're talking about 450 billion, $445 billion of activity. And so we believe that we have to help make a just transition here. And so whether it's our work with all these groups that you're talking about, your group, the Sustainable Markets, the World Economic Forum, the Alliance of Climate Leaders in the World Economic Forum, the Pope's Inclusive Capitalism. These are all groups that are promoting the idea of a just transition, the energy side, and an ability to actually make things happen and make this all take place. Now, Paris put a frame on this that had more of an official sector and changed the motion, but most of us are motivated by, we believe it's got to happen, but we believe it's got to be done in a way that preserves the economies and the growth. And it's, we worked with the UN on a project called Sustainable Energy for All. This was a question of how you could get the SDGs done on the environmental side, but energy for all was a question. And those types of things are critical, which we have to have a balanced, fair transition across the globe and realize it's going to take time and investment and innovation, and that's what capitalism brings. So what motivates us is there's a business opportunity. What motivates us is the right thing to do, and we can both deliver for society and deliver for our shareholders, and that's a wonderful place to be.
You mentioned clients. There's huge demand for ESG products. The numbers are pretty staggering. We have Larry Fink on later today who's going to go through some of his statistics from BlackRock. How do we ensure quality? How do we scale ourselves in terms of the supply side of financial products, given the huge demand for a wide variety of ESG targeted investment products?
Well, I think we have to think sort of structurally about all these questions. And that's one of the things that having all these CEOs talk, and the asset management group and the asset owners group and the SMI has Larry and colleagues working with it, that Ron O'Hanley leads it. So you have the major investors there. But let's structurally think about it. The first thing is for companies to get to carbon neutrality and net zero and make the commitments, which we've committed to net zero in accord with the Paris Agreement, not only across our operational activities, but also across our financing. And that'll take time. But the key to getting that done is actually the companies we lend to and the companies that supply to us, et cetera, also are committing to get their scope 1 and 2, because their scope 1 and 2 becomes our 3. And so that's what we need. We need everybody to commit to that. That can provide an energy around activity change and demand that will drive this. And so that's one thing that we can't forget. So that's a core thing. And what that will also drive is a demand for carbon offsets. That will drive the demand for clean energy. If you're running data centers and you got to get the energy supplying to be clean, you're going to drive the utilities like we did with Duke Power in North Carolina to build a solar plant to help supply us power so we can say we're clean energy. So don't forget that basic step. Now you go to ESG investing, and we have a huge amount of product going in ESG investing. I think probably $50 billion plus growing. That is alignment of capitalism. That's alignment of the way you invest against the ESG principles or against the SDGs. And that's bringing money and saying, put it in company A versus company B, because the disclosure is allowing me to assess whether company A or company B is doing enough. And the idea is not to say all the money should go to one company who's doing the best, because that just won't work. But the idea is with these disclosures to say, let's set a line above which you're investable, lendable, you're purchasable from a consumer perspective. And the companies that disclose and can be assessed that way, ESG products will invest in. And our clients are demanding to help take their portfolios and making them ESG sensitive and driving. Now, why is that needed? The reality is, if you invest in companies, if you avoid companies that weren't good at ESG, you would have avoided 90% of bankruptcies over the last several decades. Savita Subramanian in our group has proven that out. There is also a lot of work that says they actually outperform. But even if I'm an asset manager, investor, or person, and I avoid companies that go bankrupt, I avoid losing companies, and that's a good piece of information. So these ESG principles, standardized, disclosed, allow portfolio managers then to make a common assessment across 20 participants in the industry, who is doing enough that I should stay with them. That then encourages a capitalist system to drive people to make the change. And so that's the sort of integrated business system. So ESG investing is a critical part of that. But we also need carbon neutral commitments on the environmental side and commitments on the SDGs from operating companies. And we also need new money to invest to help the infrastructure, which is a different thing. That's raising specific new money from high net worth and institutional investors to fund the infrastructure and other projects needed. And then we need the insurance sector to insure political risk and stuff. So it takes all the parts. But ESG investing is important because that takes the mainstream companies and moves them, and then they can create huge demand pockets for clean energy, for the transition. And that's very important.
And do you have clients that are concerned that somehow they're going to get left out? Maybe they're in a hard to abate sector or the energy sector. A CEO of Southern Company was on this morning. She's done a remarkable job in transitioning from coal to renewables. You mentioned Duke. Energy companies are making the transition, not all of them, but do you have clients that are concerned that somehow they're going to be left out of this process?
There'll always be clients concerned, but the idea of disclosing, even for hard to abate sectors, as called, or energy producers or power producers, what they are doing, and if they have a plan and they stick to it, the idea is we have to stay with them, help invest to make them, to give them the capital and help them make that transition. So again, with a common set of metrics, and with the ability to see that, you can see the energy companies are making moves and driving, and many are, and they've made public announcements about their commitments to net zero, carbon neutral in their operations, and these are critical elements. And their innovation isn't critical to make this happen. So the idea is to help them make the transition by staying invested in them, by driving, but they have to declare, disclose, and say what they're doing so the public and regulatory environment and we all can hold them accountable. So the idea is this is not a not divest or type of strategy. This is a strategy that says stay with these companies that are making progress to help them make the progress, because that will then allow for the just transition to take place. If we don't do that, we won't have a just transition.
You mentioned, we are capitalists, we're business people, we're looking for opportunities. There are huge opportunities in this space. Bill Gates was on this morning talking about his portfolio of investments and his new book as well. Talk a little bit about the opportunities you see for Bank of America in investing in these new technologies.
Well, just last year, we did $100 billion of financial activity for our customers in the SDGs, half of which was in environmental. So, $50 billion of capital formulation, whether it's, this is our clients' work. So whether it's underwriting green bonds or investments in, solar and wind or whatever it is, that's what we're driving, or other offset capabilities or transition capabilities. So there's a big business opportunity. So when we say, back to the old thing, profits and purpose, stakeholder capitalism, deliver to the shareholder and for the society, environmental fits right along that dimension. And that's why we say over the next decade, we can do $450 billion of new investment just on the environmental side, and far more on the SDG side, because the business opportunity is there, as all this investment has to be made to make the transition happen.
Brian, you're a savvy observer of all things in Washington. You know the town well. We have a Biden administration which has made climate a top priority beyond dealing with the pandemic and economic renewal. It's a whole government approach, but Washington is bitterly divided. How do you approach the policymaking environment in Washington, embracing the administration's objectives, but navigating sort of the rough shoals of partisanship?
Well, I think at the end of the day, just think back what you've seen happen among companies over the last 4 or 5 years, irrespective of policy decisions all over the world going all back and forth and swinging. So you've seen companies make massive carbon neutral and net zero commitments. You've seen companies help drive offset investments. You've seen companies like ours make billions and billions of dollars into renewables investments. You've seen green bond issuance by companies globally go up dramatically over time. And you've seen bonds issued for social bonds and other types of purposes, which are similar in racial and social justice, which is critical. So, I think at the end of the day, the policymakers can enable and permit, for lack of a better term, enable activities to take place faster, and they'll help drive change. But the real key is for the private sector, because in the end of the day, that's what will bring the capital and the money and innovation to keep driving this change. And that's what you've seen. And I expect under the new administration that there'll be renewed efforts between, Secretary Kerry and Gina McCarthy and others that will help us get our activity to move even faster. Rejoining Paris, a bunch of CEOs said, don't get out of Paris originally. I was one of the original signatures. We believe in it. You got to do it. These are all things. And so you have to manage the things. But I think if we get everybody focused on a transition and a just transition, the issue is to do things over time, but to do things every day.
Brian, last question. You've built an amazing culture at Bank of America. How did you get all of your associates, all your employees, your leadership team focused on this as a priority? And how do you get them to believe it and then implement, execute on it?
Well, at the end of the day, we have a principle of Bank of America we call responsible growth. It's got to grow no excuses. It's got to be customer focused in how you grow. Got to grow with the right risk, but you have to grow on a sustainable basis. And to be sustainable, best place for teammates to work, share our success with our communities, and drive operational excellence, because that allows us to pay for all this. And in the end of the day, our teammates believe that. And that last part of sharing our success with our communities is our ESG work. And so our team believes that, we ask the world what we'd like the power to do, and they've told us in the SDGs, and our job is to help do that but we got to deliver for shareholders at the same time. And that's why we believe in, we got to do what's right, deliver for, shareholders and for society. And our teammates believe that. You see that in the survey, you see that in the employee scores and who comes to work for us, and they test us on it. And so when they don't think we're doing it right, they let us know it, and that's one of the interesting elements here that you have. So, how do we have ESG investment products? Because our wealth management business and our institutional business at CRADAP, why'd they start researching? We never said to our research team, go research these topics. They figured out that this was a core trend that was going on, and they had to help bring some enlightenment to it. So it's the team that we have that's so talented that brings us our ideas and innovation and work, and we feel very proud of that. And so it's not like we're fighting anything. It's here we go, let's get it done.
Brian, thank you for spending some time with us today, and thank you for your leadership. We at the IF and all of our sister organizations involved in this project are really committed to this endeavor. It's a journey, and we're just getting started. But thank you and all of Bank of America. We couldn't have done it without you. But thank you for your leadership on these issues. We really look forward to working with you in the future. And thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, Tim. And in the end of the day, we have to invest and use innovation and capitalism to drive these massive changes, because you think of how much talent there is in all our companies and organizations like yours. So thank you for all your help here. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Great, Brian. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.